day. It's not every day you come to church and someone throws candy at you. It is a grand day of celebration. It is the day that we call Palm Sunday. And as we begin our worship with a parade, we know that everyone loves a parade. It's a time of excitement. From the day of Jesus' time to our time now, it builds enthusiasm and hope and joy. So we had to include the candy, because in our culture, that's part of a parade. You heard what the children said. But let us not miss the importance of this day in the life of our faith as well. We celebrate that triumphant day when Jesus rode into Jerusalem, to be celebrated as a leader, as one who was loved by so many. And yet in the midst of our parade and our celebration, we also know that this day is the beginning of a difficult week. It's a time when we remember what we call the Passion of Jesus. It is the week when Jesus is challenged and tried and betrayed and left alone and ultimately to die. How much more fun would it be to go straight from our celebration and parade today and skip everything until we get to the joyous celebration of Easter next week? It would be fun, but we can't. We won't. For to get to Easter, we have to pass through Good Friday. The story of Jesus has all these days in between during this week that we call holy. Our Christian tradition marks these days with our community gathering in remembrance and worship. The gathering with the disciples for the Last Supper is what we call Maundy Thursday. And then moving to the torment and eventual crucifixion of Jesus is what we call Good Friday. It is a lot to take in. That's why we do it together. That's why we do it together. We come together as our community of faith to worship and address the struggles and the hard times in our lives, as well as all of the celebrations. This week is a week for some that they would rather just bypass altogether. And believe me, there are days when I feel that way too. Let's just skip. But perhaps this week can be seen as an opportunity for us to ask some of the hard questions of our faith. Maybe they're not ones we want to talk about every day, and we don't have to. But this is a time for us to do our own reflection, an inner journey, our spiritual growth. So I invite you to take that journey with me this morning. A journey you may not like, a journey I wouldn't do every week, believe me, but a journey that we share together as a community of faith. So what about some of those hard questions of our faith? Like, what about suffering? Where is God? What can we learn from Jesus? What can we learn about God? You know, there is suffering, and then there is suffering. Sometimes we feel like we are suffering when we stub our big toe, or we missed a flight, or something that we really wanted to do got canceled, or we get a long-lasting virus. Or then there's a deeper suffering, like we didn't get the promotion, or that chronic illness just hangs on, or we didn't win the championship, or we get into an argument with a friend or a family member, or all those budget cuts that affect our work and our livelihood. And then there's the really heart-wrenching, tough kind of suffering. When a loved one dies or leaves, or the illness is terminal, or there is no food to eat in the house, or a job ends, or there's no job to be found, or you are evicted from your home, or serious depression sets in, or someone drinks and drives and crashes and kills someone else, or a plane crashes and kills everyone. Wow. When we start to think about suffering, there can be a really long list. So where do we turn? Let's think for a moment about Jesus and his experience. Surely it must have been very painful for him to endure such constant challenge to his mission and ministry. Many of his friends and disciples turned away from him. People in authority wanted to accuse him of every possible kind of wrongdoing. And then they acted out their anger by abusing him and ultimately crucifying him. What did Jesus do? He did what most of us would do. He asked why. He asked his disciples, "Why could you not stay awake with me while I pray?" He asked God, "Why have you forsaken me?" For over 2,000 years, in the midst of endless suffering, Jesus' followers like you and like me and like all of us still ask, why? Why did this, and you fill in the blank, happen to me? Well, let me say right away that there are no easy answers to suffering. And still we ask the questions, because that's part of who we are as human beings. Why does God allow suffering? And where is God when suffering occurs? The people of God have been asking these questions since the beginning of time. The entire book of Job grapples with this problem of suffering, and unfortunately, Job does not answer the question, nor does anyone else. There is no final answer. However, we do have some ideas about why suffering occurs. There is all of the kinds of suffering that is caused by human choices. Each and every one of us have been gifted by what we call free will, the opportunity to make choices. Sometimes people abuse that freedom and make terrible choices that result in suffering. Some of those choices result in the abuse of people or substances. Even things like terrorism and murder, or our environmental irresponsibility, or any kind of random shootings or violence, or even poor health or greed. These choices are not just the bad things that we do, but also the good things that we don't do. And every single day, we make a choice about how we live. There are also those laws of nature that cause suffering. Life on our planet involves natural laws. We depend on something like gravity to make life work. But there are some who will tell you very quickly after a serious fall that gravity can create suffering. And the same is true for the weather. All those natural effects of cold fronts and warm fronts meeting up with each other. And right now we're in the season where we're constantly hearing encouragement to be prepared for weather. We heard this week about all of the storms that happened in Oklahoma. And we know from their experience, from our own experience, just how quickly something like a tornado or a flood can change life and bring suffering. So we have all those human choices, we have the laws of nature, and they explain a lot of our suffering, but not all of it. Through the years, all kinds of other answers have been collected to explain suffering. For example, some people say that God allows suffering to make us better people and make us grow. Or others would argue that suffering is caused by some demonic force of evil beyond anything in our control. You've probably heard a lot of other explanations. I think that all of these kinds of answers are pretty tentative and quite incomplete. For there really is no final definitive answer about the problem of suffering. But as I think about it this way. I believe even if we had perfect answers, I wonder if that would really help. An intellectual answer that may explain suffering does not heal one's body or ease one's grief. When suffering occurs, we cannot help but ask all those wondering questions. But even if we had an answer, the pain would still be with us. Even if we had some great explanation, we would still feel the pain. So I would like to invite us today to think about perhaps a more helpful question. And that question is, where is God when suffering occurs? Right now we can see it's in a caring mom. Right? Thanks for the illustration. It's perfect timing. That is the more profound question for us as a Christian believer. For our answer to that is clear. Where is God in the midst of suffering? God is right smack in the middle of it. All of it. We learned that from Jesus this week. I believe that one of the most painful experiences, most difficult experience for any parent is the loss of a child. Whether that's through death or separation or estrangement or whatever the circumstance might be. And it doesn't matter whether this child is an infant or a young person or an adult. Think about what this last week in Jesus' life must have been like for God. Have you ever thought about that? Of course, we cannot pretend to know all of God's thoughts and feelings. But imagine the pain of seeing your child go through the experiences that Jesus had. Hearing all that questioning of Jesus. Imagine seeing your hope for the world and all the possibilities of new life be crucified on a cross. Our Friday affirms that God enters human suffering. The cross of Jesus tells us that even in suffering, or especially in suffering, God is present. Jesus tells us that when we suffer, God suffers with us. Although God does not take away our suffering, God does enter our pain and shares it with us and walks with us. And that's why we have a cross on the wall to remind us. And then, God ultimately redeems our suffering, as we will see on Easter. Stay tuned at the end, or maybe we should say the beginning, that comes in a week. And so for us, this week, let's stick together. Let's take the journey of our faith, every step of it. Let's worship together as the community of faith. Let's celebrate the love and grace of God that is made known to us in the life and even the death of Jesus. And let us remember, as our affirmation of faith always tells us, in life, in death, in life beyond death, God is with us. We are not alone. Thanks be to God. Amen.